Hi, this is Bill Hader.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Bill Hader.
Bill Hader?
Come on in for another episode of We Heart Hater. I am these Barons creamsicle enthusiast.
And I'm your co-host and one of those real guys, you know what I mean? I'm a real, guy, I'm your co-host and real guy, Casey Killingsworth.
Yes, you are. And I'm not just referencing creamsicle enthusiast because it relates to the episode, but I actually love creamsicles. They're awesome.
Well, who doesn't?
Exactly, because cream and orange, it just makes sense. So we're on the documentary now side, back with season 1, episode 4, The Eye Doesn't Lie. This is a homage to the documentary The Thin Blue Line, which is available on Tubi, because I was watching it this afternoon. It's an investigation into the wrongful conviction of a man sentenced to death of the 1986 murder of John Patrick Winslow, based on The Thin Blue Line, which is a Errol Morris documentary from 1996, and this is about the trial and conviction. I know with documentary now we're trying to come up with the concept. Okay, are these tributes? Are these homages? I'm going to take a little page from Weird Al's book. I'm going to say that this is a style parody of The Thin Blue Line, because it covers a lot of the particular types of filmmaking they were doing at the time. In particular, they used the same lenses from The Thin Blue Line. A style documentary that was due at the time involving reenactments. As we know now, a common standard for all the true crime shows that Bill loves so much. They originally had a different episode planned. For some reason, it just wasn't working. Despite having all these sets built, they contacted IFC. This isn't working, we're going to do something else. As described in this clip from the Hollywood Reporter 2016 IFC Emmy panel.
I remember going and having dinner with Reese and Alex on a Friday going, so we just shot the concert footage from Blue Jean Committee, and then we went and had dinner. We're like, so what are we going to do on Monday? Yeah. And we went to Errol Morris, and we said, let's do Thin Blue Line, and called you guys, and you went, I guess I'll go watch Thin Blue Line, and
But it
wrote
was,
up.
and that's where the SNL education is really helpful, which is we're kind of used to, 2 days, you're like, 2 days? Fantastic. I thought we'd only have one.
Oh, my God. I only thought we had 30 minutes. This is fantastic. This is all the time in War and Peace.
So let us get into The Eye Doesn't Lie. Bill plays Robbie Whelan, and Fred is Don Lentile, and later John's twin brother, Paul Lentile. Helen Mirren's opening,
There is perhaps no stronger evidence of the power of documentary than the film that exonerates an innocent man. That was what the director of The Eye Doesn't Lie set out to do in 1985. Enjoy.
So they show a bunch of shots, intercuts of interviews, and these very stylized recreations, like a lot of stuff in slow motion, that looks like it's kind of filmed in a black box theater style, because there's very little background to them. So the story goes that Don was on his way to Santa Fe, New Mexico for the Santa Fe Guitar Festival. He saw Don hitchhiking and picked them up. Robbie recalls that he was hitchhiking along Route 281 in San Antonio because it seemed like a thing to do at the time. Don pulled over, invited him in, which Don describes Robbie as...
He's one of those real guys, you know what I mean? Those guys who are just really, the real, real guys,
Robbie takes note of a very clean car.
He had a shirt on, kind of shirt you buy on vacation. I think it said resort. He was wearing a braided belt. And didn't take me long to notice that this was not my kind of guy.
So as they're driving along, and Don mentions that if bad things happen to good people, then he must be some kind of a saint. There's a reenactment of a man pulling up to his car and stopping to shoot a sign swinger, played by Nathan Barnett, outside a car wash. And there's one of those wacky waving inflatable things out there. They show that getting shot first, and then the sign spinner getting shot.
Okay, so I got a couple of oopsie goofs right off the bat. when in my research for this podcast, I found on the IMDb page, there's a whole section of continuity errors. So I'm just going to chime in with those because that many of them I thought were funny. There is an inflatable air-filled dancing advertising tube man, also called a sky dancer or air dancer, shown when the murder occurs in November of 1976. First appearance of the Tube Man, originally called the Tall Boy, at the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta, 20 years after it is depicted here. Also, they're showing the wacky, waving, inflatable, flailing arm Tube Men 20 years before they were even invented. And also, I'd like to know, what kind of car wash still has its dancing sign spinners working shifts as late as 8 and 9 p.m.? People may be getting gas, but probably not their car wash that late at night. A second one, after we see the literal smoking gun intercut with courtroom diagram drawings where the bullets enter the body, we see the sign spinner fall to the ground, followed by an extreme close-up of a newspaper clipping, sign spinner murdered, a story about John P. Winslow's murder. Underneath John P. Winslow's picture, it states that he was named Salutatorian, spelled Saluditoran. The word should be Salutatorian with 2 T's and no D's. Date on the newspaper fade from November 29th, 1976 to December 28th, 1976.
After a brief segment of showing some pictures of where diagrams of where the bullets hit, we go to another scene with Don relating that he was at Denny's eating a Grand Slam, which he found was a bit undercooked, as he insisted that if you're going to serve food, you should cook it. In the process, he's writing a note to the manager on a napkin with a pen he borrows from the waitress. 2 cops enter to take him to the interrogation room. So we go into a reenaction scene where they have Jeffrey Ashkin playing the reenactment actor as Don with his interrogated.
I do love when these reenactments pick up. You do have a point, Deej. They do seem at home in like any cheap cable docudrama you see from the 2000s onward, especially ones where they couldn't even get any of the real people they're telling the story about, but they seem a little out of place in anything from the 80s. But I do love how they executed these interrogation reenactments. They went to the trouble of putting a wig and a shirt on this actor to make him look like the fake mugshot of Fred as Don Lentile. They dressed him up like that, but made no other efforts to make him look like Fred Armisen character at all.
Fred is narrating as they show the reenactment. So the cop presents him with a printed confession and asks him to sign the confession, of which Don refuses, in particular, that he wants to have his lawyer look at it, even though his lawyer is his real estate lawyer and not a criminal lawyer. The cop says that...
And he says, you're going to sign it, or you're never going to see your wife again. I said, guess what? I'm happily divorced for 11 years.
The cop follows up with, well, guess what? You're never going to see your kids again.
I said, I don't have any kids. You know, something's wrong with my ex-wife's uterus. I don't want to go into it in detail, but her ovaries kind of recoil back like a vacuum cleaner cord.
The cop places a gun on the table and instructs him to pick it up, which he does. And the cop says, oh, you just pulled a gun on me. I'm going to include a link to this in the description for this episode. Every so often they do a comparison of things in the original documentary compared to documentary now. These scenes actually happened in the original documentary. They had him try to sign a confession. They had him pick up the gun. And so they do a alternating of, this is what we did, this is what the original was, just to show how things are cohesive. You can see that in all this time that the police are trying to set him up, even if he's guilty or not. So after Don puts the gun down, Copy picks up the gun and cocks it and tries again to sign the confession. We don't know the reasons for this at the time, but as the episode goes on, which we'll explain in most likely Act 2, as to why people really want to convict this guy so much. And that is Act 1.
Okay, so Act 1 ends with Don having a gun pulled on him and his response to the cop Holt threatening him with a gun is, buddy, that's the exact wrong way to deal with me. And the idea of him doing something like this, killing someone, is crazy. So Act 2 starts more on the documentary side, where we hear the actual factual police report, the official statement on the events that night from Detective Pettibone, played by Gary Krause, who tells us the sign spinner was a very popular young man due to the flashy style in which he would spin his side and ride it like a rocket, which was a very funny visual. Suddenly, he was shot by a .357 caliber pistol fired by the driver, and at that time, a creamsicle truck. Yes, Deej?
For those who have already enjoyed Barry, if you haven't watched Barry yet, why not? Because you should. Gary Krause, who plays Detective Pettibone, is the same actor that plays Chief Krause in Barry, also known as Big Cat.
Yeah, I knew he looked familiar. So after the pistol was fired by the driver, a creamsicle truck pulled up 100 yards from the scene of the crime, and we got another oopsie-goof here. The detective states that the creamsicle truck that the police officer was buying a creamsicle from pulled up 100 yards behind the shooter's car. When the clip is shown, the truck is no more than 30 feet from the shooter's car. We see the reenactor of policewoman Barnsby, played by Lisa Dempsey. She fired 6 times at the driver as he pulled away and only hit the wacky inflatable flailing ARP-2 man. She managed to get the make and model of the car, which we may hear later, but not the license plate. At that time, Mr. Winslow had died. Next, we hear from Detective Pomerantz, played by Van Epperson, on Robbie's criminal history. Robbie Whelan was new and was friendly with all the cops in town. He was constantly getting into trouble, cutting class, shooting off bottle rockets. He was well-liked and had lots of friends in town. They knew he was a good kid. And another oopsie-goof here. This story takes place in Texas in 1976, but Robbie Whelan is said to have robbed a convenience store of its scratch-off tickets and returned later to the store to complain that none of them were winners. Texas did not approve lottery games until 1991, and the first scratch-off tickets became available for purchase in November of 1992. This is an instance where the police really liked him and really wanted his assistance because they knew Robbie had a way himself of knowing about other criminal happenings in town. So they asked him for info on the car wash shooting, which he'd only provide to Detective Pomerantz if he agreed to wear a sign around his neck that said "Kid's Sister" and act out this role. When they'd ask him something, he would say, "Who's asking?" And Kid's sister wants to know. They'd act it out with the hair thing, and they were laughing so much. It was so much fun you forget this was a murder investigation. So Robbie handed the detective a piece of paper where Don willingly wrote his name, address, and phone number, and he did this for a specific reason we'll find out a bit later on. So we see more interview footage of Don and Robbie talking about the night of the murder. Robbie says that after spending an hour in this guy's very clean car, Don just wouldn't shut up about jazz guitar. So Robbie put in his Poison cassette, which Don didn't like. So he made Robbie take the cassette out, put it in its case, and put it away neatly in his pocket. Speaking of Poison, although the killing took place in 1976, Robbie talks about listening to his Poison cassette. Poison's first record didn't come out until 1986. The band didn't even form until 1983. Moving on, I did like the detail of the title of this tape being Swallow This Live and his favorite track being track 1, Intro. Then he played I Want Some Action Tonight. He wasn't into that. Poison did actually put out this album in 1991. It was a live album called Swallow This Live. with a track that's actually called I Want Action. And if you Google the album cover for Poison's Swallow This Live from 1991, you'll see that in the lower right-hand corner, the name Swallow This Live is designed to look exactly like the famous SNL circular logo from the show featured in its titles from 1988 to 1994, the Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman, Farley Sandler years, that era. Because Don took Robbie's Poison cassette out, or made Robbie take it out, and denied him listening to it, Robbie said to himself,
And I said right there, I said, if I ever get a chance to screw this man over, I will do it in a hot Texas minute. You do not mess with my music, especially my Poison. Not cool. I want some action tonight. He wasn't into that.
And Don says, yeah, he knows exactly what I want some action means. And I think he was thinking this could turn into something it wasn't going to. Suddenly they pull up on the sign spinner and Robbie just says, that guy sucks. Somebody should shoot him. And Don concludes Robbie has some issues. He then asks Robbie to chip in for gas. Robbie says he can't chip in for gas. That is why he is hitchhiking. Well, probably one of the reasons. I'd love to know more. It can't have just been a nice thing to do.
It is logical, though, because why would he need to hitchhike if he didn't have money? So, makes perfect sense.
So this is why Don wrote his name, address, and phone number on a piece of paper, handed it to Robbie, and urged him to be a friend and do the right thing. And that was the last that Robbie saw of Don. Then Don met up with his brother at a motel at 9 p.m. He remembers it was 9 p.m. because that was when Mama's Family was on, which he had to shush his brother so he could watch and hear. And he says it was the episode where the son wanted to start a dry cleaning business. We see a close-up of this TV Guide listing. But IMDb also says a Mama's Family television episode where Mama's son Vinton tries to buy a dry cleaning business. No Mama's Family episode exists with this in the plot. Deej?
Just commenting that I used to I miss TV Guide. I understand it's kind of hard to do a TV Guide with how widespread television is these days, but every Monday, as soon as that new issue came out, I was right there reading all the stuff at the beginning and the back, and I actually had a reasonably sizable collection of TV Guides at one time.
Here we're coming on what I consider to be a comedic high point of this episode. So we go back to Detective Pettibone, who says he is an excellent judge of character. And that's why he does not like Don Lentile. He says Don showed no remorse when asked about the killing. He had trail mix in every pocket. Just when you think he was out, he'd have more trail mix, and he was being interrogated. And, this apparently goes against the unspoken no food or sleep while being interrogated rule. He says it's...
And this wasn't even that fun trail mix with the pretzels and the M&Ms. This was that real dry, raisiny trail mix.
I'm ashamed to say, but I pulled my gun on him at one point and said, stop eating that trail mix.
And then we see a reenactment shot of the detective throwing a bag of trail mix against a wall in slow motion. That little bit of ZAZ airplane, Naked Gun-esque silliness there. Pettibone goes on to say that even with Don's testimony, the detectives had trouble building their case due to how little Officer Roberta Barnsby remembered about the car. She only remembered shooting the wacky, waving, inflatable, flailing arm tube man and dropping Creamsicle. And we see a slow-mo shot of a slimy-looking, semi-melted Creamsicle being thrown to the ground. And a shot of maybe she had Creamsicle on her gun. And we see a shot of fingers dripping with ice cream. All that, the Creamsicle being thrown away, were just funny visuals. And maybe he has a point, because stopping to get a Creamsicle after hearing shots fired, maybe that does make her a bad police officer after all. but not a worse person than Don Lentile for this next joke he makes. He tells a Q-tip joke. He says, someone better get me some Q-tips because I can't believe what I'm hearing. And that's the end of Act 2.
The things I love about this particular sequence is in the line version, it was a chocolate malted. And one of the things she repeats quite often is that it's a policewoman.
Or should I say, policewoman, because she was a woman. Officer Barnsby, the woman.
I'm not sure if he's mentioning this, making himself appear to be progressive, or he can't believe, oh my God, they actually have a woman doing this. I did laugh with the part about the trail mix, because there's trail mix, and then there's the fun trail mix. So they were having a hell of a time trying to build a case because of Don was basically just climbing up, which technically, as you should, because, whatever you say can be used against you in a court of law. They got lucky with, there was a pawn shop owner, played by Cedric Yarborough, who was originally from Reno 911.
I'm just going to say it's nice to see Cedric Yarborough pop up in any work on or off of Reno 911. He's a funny dude. And also, keep in mind, IMDb says the large pawn shop sign includes giant depictions of a smartphone and a modern laptop. And yet this is supposed to be a documentary from 1985, 1986, that it takes place in 85, 86, but it's about a murder that supposedly took place 10 years earlier in 76. So,
yeah, what I remember Cedric from is the series Speechless. He is playing the aide to a teenager with cerebral palsy, which also starred Minnie Driver and John Ross Bowie, that he was listening to a Johnny Mathis record. Just as he was closing up, when he heard the sounds, it's like pop, pop, pop. Just minutes after 9 p.m. He thought some kids may be playing with fireworks, until he remembered it was not fireworks season. He thought some popcorn was being popped, but none of his neighbors like popcorn. And if popcorn was making that loud of a noise, you would think that that'd be some really big kernel of popcorn. He also thought it was part of the Johnny Mathis song he was listening to. He looked things up on the album, and no one was credited with popping sound. So he thought he should see what's going on. He saw out the window between a car or a toaster, the sign spinner lying on the ground, next to a car with a gun sticking out. He made a mental note that the car was a gray Ford Jabroni, and I actually have to see if that is actually a brand of car or not, because Jabroni is a very particular type of word. Yeah, apparently the Jabroni was actually a real car, because I think it's The Rock that uses the term Jabroni. Both of the cars, it turns out, have a vanity license plate. So this one was I Love Puss. Don's beige Chevy Boca Raton has exclamation point, jazz, exclamation point. This one quote from Pomerantz, title drop.
Eyewitness is your best witness, because the eyes don't lie. Memory knows what it saw, and if your memory's confused, then we can give it a little nudge.
They got the owner to admit he is technically possible they saw a Chevy Boca Raton with a jazz license plate. With this, they got their case against Don Lentile, so Pomerantz got some of the other detectives and Robbie to celebrate. And apparently they got drunker than a monkey's ass, because they finally got something to nail this guy on. The owner does feel, I guess, a little regretful, because he says it possibly changed the story to what he thought the cops wanted to hear. And he'll let the cops sort them out itself. He was just happy to be of help. Then the prosecutor, Jeffrey Ray Dupree, was known for his ability to get conviction and was particularly excited to take on this case. He had made a bet with another prosecutor that he could get the most death penalty sentences that year. This is an excellent behind-the-scenes fact. They wanted to find a court sketch artist that could mimic the style of the guy in the original court case. They're in the filming of court scenes, maybe a day into the production of those, and the guy they got to do the drawings turns out to be the actual court artist who did the original case back in 76.
And the actual court sketch artist from Thin Blue Line.
But by
accident. They got a sketch artist, and the guy who was doing it, he goes, oh, I did Thin Blue Line.
It was like, this is amazing. You've mimicked this style.
And he's like, no, man, I'm from Dallas. I did this. This is me. I did it. We're like, you're such an amazing mimic. No, you ain't listening to me.
he was trying to make the case that Don's divorce drove him to kill. And Don mentions that his divorce was immediately amicable, and he's actually good friends with his ex-wife. Then we hear about late defense attorney Earl Yoder from his daughter, Marjorie Yoder, played by Deb Hyatt. He is one of the best Texas defense attorneys in the $200 to $300 range. I love how they mentioned a certain price range. Among the many holes in Dupree's case, the shooter's right hand is, and Don's right hand is permanently asleep. It's not that he can't use it. It's just, it's always tingling. Then Don brings up the static on the motel TV during Mama's family. The log does show at the motel that he did call the front desk to complain. The hotel proprietor, Jody Fellowweather, said it was one of those calls you don't forget because it's so rude to her, and to quote Bill,
And that's when she snapped.
while she was on the witness stand and screamed, "People like you should die," pointing out that Don was the murderer. Don's brother Paul was at the hotel with Don, but he was considered an unusable witness because his memory of dates and basketball stats is useless. That is Act 3.
We end with Act 4. Robbie says he was nervous about the holes in his story, his timeline basically being a circle. And if you look closely at the show within a show and pay close attention to when all these scenes are supposed to take place, you may see some inconsistencies in the show's real timeline versus ours. So maybe there's a brilliant hidden meta joke there that only I caught. Robbie was waiting for Don's lawyer to rip into him, but then Don started eating chocolates in court that were bought to him by Paul, commenting on each filling.
I'd say, oh, this one's gonna be cherry, and oh, ooh, it's cherry, or, this one's gonna be coconut.
You just naming off every single filling to these chocolates, and I thought, well, I'm gonna be fine.
One of the detectives said if he were Don's lawyer, he would have just told him to cool it with the chocolates. Paul Yoder's daughter mentioned that he was beginning to suffer from dementia by the time the trial got started, and somehow he got it into his head that Don was a Nazi sympathizer and wrestled him to the ground. She goes on to say, even though there should have been a mistrial, this is the best possible defense for Don Lentile anyone could have possibly mounted, because some people you just cannot defend, no matter how innocent they are. Robbie says, yeah, I butchered my story. I think the lawyers counted about 500 lies, but he thinks the jury liked him for not being Don Lentile. The prosecuting attorney then played a long track from a jazz guitar album that Don listened to the night of the murder, and Don, getting into it, just snapped along with his eyes closed. Then they go on to say that this is the only time that a courtroom delivered a standing ovation when a judge handed down a death sentence. It was an open and shut case that just Don should be behind bars. And when asked if Don would do it again, he said he'd do it 1,000,000 times over again. I don't even know what you're talking about when you say, would you do it again? But I definitely would. He'd do it to you right now or any of us. Is he a threat? You bet he is. Then we see a title card that says Robbie Whelan was interviewed again one last time on November 12th, 1985. The voice of the interviewer on this tape is none other than John Mulaney, credited as co-writer of this episode along with Bill, and also a creative consultant or consulting producer, something with consult. Robbie just says,
Do I think he's innocent? Maybe.
Then why do you think he's behind bars?
Maybe if he had rocked out the poison, Maybe if he had let a man play his tapes, who knows? Things could have gone different. But I'm the only one that knows.
You're the only one that knows what?
That I did it.
Well, everyone knows you did it.
They do?
Yeah, they can tell from the film.
Will you make it obvious? Or?
Well, we're gonna just cut it together. It'll be pretty clear that you did it.
Well, that's not good. But Don just sucks,
Yeah. He is pretty annoying.
Yeah. So, there you go.
the epilogue states that Don Lentile is on death row in Ellis Unit, San Antonio, Texas. Robbie Whelan is serving a life sentence for the 1984 murder of a jazz studies professor, which is probably something that heavily influenced all of these events, but is only coming out here instead of the previous interviews. And then over the credits, we see that Don is the only person who doesn't know for sure if Robbie did it, despite being in the car with him right next to him when it happened, but he would like to find out. And that's the episode. My overall take on it isn't so much that Bill's character is his sole focus. It's not about how deeply he went into character. Fred's character is more the centerpiece of it, although he's not the focus. It's more than anything an ensemble piece where each individual player gets to score with their own moments. It was very funny, though. Not quite as funny as the 3 episodes that preceded it, because in this one, the humor is a bit more subtle and creeps up on you, but still works as a great ensemble piece. One last note I'll add about Fred and Bill's characterizations here. Fred's voice reminded me of the same dull, congested New Yorker voice. I know I've seen him use multiple times, particularly in the Anne Hathaway Wizard of Oz sketch he did on SNL in November 2010. And Bill's whole character reminded me of his character in Top Dog Chef from the Jennifer Lawrence episode in 2013. Fred's whole character seemed like one we've seen him play numerous times in his late SNL run, especially 2009 to 2012. So if you just never got into those dim, self-absorbed Fred Armisen characters from around that time, this one's for you, because he finally inadvertently gives himself his own comeuppance for playing those characters.
The character he was playing in the Wizard of Oz sketch was a weather vane, because they were describing scenes that were cut from the actual film. So all this stuff were done. And I just happened to watch Top Dog Chef the other day. I love that one. They have Bill playing a sheepdog, which just seems completely his kind of character. So looking at the performances between Bill and the actual person in the documentary, he does capture the essence of the real person. So this is more of a, not so much diving into disappearing into the character, but for an impression of the original person, he does extremely well. Just the whole concept of the only reason that Don ended up on death row because everyone thought he was annoying. I mean, I've known a lot of people who are annoying in my past. As much as they are annoying, I don't wish them to be on death row.
Well, then again, this is Texas, and like Ron White once said, down in Texas, if you kill someone, they'll kill you back, because they have the death penalty down there and they use it.
In one little case, I'm going to defend Don Lentile a little bit. There are certain rules that you have when you're in a car with someone, and it's usually whoever is driving gets to pick music. I can understand where Robbie would want to enjoy his music. He's being given a ride from someone out of the goodness of his heart. Might be annoying. Don seems to be a generally okay kind of guy. Definitely not a guy's guy like Robert is. Just the little petty things that someone can just take things over, like just because he don't want to listen to Poison, he ends up, I just want to get this guy screwed up as much as possible. I love the bit where we're going to do this. Well, that doesn't really matter because I don't care about that. But the fact that even in the original one, they actually had told him to pick up the gun. So they're trying to get, in the original murder case, they're trying to get everything pinned on the person who was. The fact that they could scrap an episode, write an episode, and then get this episode made is an incredible feat of filmmaking. Looking at, as I mentioned at the top, it's generally a style parody of the documentary. The fact that they got the lenses that they used in the original one, I'm sure probably lent to this. But just the general atmosphere and the scenes between the talking heads and then what they did in the recreations with a lot of use of slow-mo, very good use of slow-mo to accentuate some points, what they did in the original documentary as well. Big credit to directors Alex Buono and Rhys Thomas. And I do love John Mulaney making a guest appearance in here, because even though Bill wasn't in season 3 of Documentary Now, my absolute favorite from that season is cast recording, take on the company cast recording. We won't be covering that on the show here, but if you do get into season 3, that is one of the highlights of that particular season. Season 1 of Documentary Now continues to impress. So we're going to be skipping the next episode, which is episode 5, A Town, a Gangster, and a Festival, because there is no trace of Bill whatsoever. Though it does have a interesting guest appearance from A.D. Bryant. So the one that we will next be covering is episode 6, Gentle and Soft, the story of the Blue Jean Committee. Casey, what do we have for our next episode for Saturday Night Live season 33?
We're going to pick up right where we left off after the strike ended with Season 33, Episode 5, February 23rd, 2008, hosted by Tina Fey with musical guest Carrie Underwood. Sure, we're going to have a fair amount to say about that because, you know, it is a historic episode in SNL's history and kind of political history, so much so that we have to, there's a big Bill sketch in there that's not a political one.
An incredibly hilarious commercial.
Another sketch, Bill's kind of in as a straight man, so I'm excited to get to that one as well.
I think we've both been watching SNL UK. So far, I've been incredibly impressed with it. Definitely standing on its own. Very, very well.
I do agree. I've been very impressed with SNL UK, and I look forward to your coverage of it on Saturday Night Ladies. And I've been writing reviews of those for my blog consistently, so as you're listening to this, I hopefully should have reviewed all the SNL UKs that have aired. And I think it's, you know, accessible to all audiences in a way. I mean, there are some references specifically to British culture and British celebrities that you might need to be British or living in England at the time to get. But other than that, it's just accessible from a sketch writing standpoint that even if they're kind of filling in some old SNL's old concepts and templates with their own ideas, it's, you can follow it, but you can tell it's a uniquely British show, which is very unique from SNL and stands out quite a bit from what SNL US is doing. And I hope that, you know, what this show is doing really lights a fire under SNL US, and really the US show, like I said on the patron feedback show, doesn't really have a choice but to match the freak of their UK counterparts. So we'll see. It'll be exciting to compare and contrast what both shows are doing when they're kind of up against each other in a way.
For now, thank you for joining us, and please like, share, subscribe, let people know we exist, because we have fun doing this, but we also do this to get people's ears onto it. So I am Deej Barons and will continue to be.
And I will still be Casey Killingsworth until I'm informed otherwise.
And we will always be very, very guilty of hearting haters.
We heart hater. It's what we do.
Thank you for listening to We Heart Hater. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. We Heart Hater is a presentation of Wacky Notion Productions. Created by Deej Barons. Hosted by Deej Barons and Casey Killingsworth. Recording and editing by Deej Barons. Intro and outro music by Music Unlimited, used under Creative Commons license, courtesy of Pixabay.com.